So what you got to figure is, well, where this animal's bedding at. You know what I'm saying? If there's a bottom there, or if there's some heavy briar thicket, that animal will start working his way out of those briars. But a lot of times they in that swamp bottom, and you got to figure out how he's traveling from where I think he is to come here and make these scrapes that you're seeing on the high ground that you're hunting all the time and you never having any encounters. You know what I mean? He's coming there, but he's coming there in the dark at night. You know, so you gotta kind of understand. Well, let me try to get closer to his bed.
That you will backtrack a deer. Like you'll based off like hunting, scouting, where you're hearing deer come from. If you think it's a buck, you'll go and kind of check his sign. You'll kind of work your way close to where he's potentially spending more of his time around his bedding area. Can you walk us through, like, how do you try to do that, and what advice would you have to other guys trying to implement that in some of these swamp bottoms across the country?
Well, I can kind of talk about this that I found about a few deer that I hunted. Some of them I was successful in killing, and some of them I never killed. That buck, to go into that bottom where he's bedding, and then to come out and, let's say, patrol that area at night, wherever the feed is or where the does are running around throughout the night, you're going to find a rub line, let's say to the north. You're going to find a rub line, and you're going to find his scrapes and his signs going into that bottom. You know what I'm saying? Over here. And then if you walk the edge of that bottom, you're going to end up finding the same type of sign further, let's say, further south of that area. And what they do, they make like a big circular pattern. And I found, okay, well, I'm going to hunt right here. Well, he don't come there that day. He ends. They'll switch up on you. You know, like one day they're gonna go into the bottom on that southern rub line they have, or that southern travel pattern that they have, and the next day they're gonna do it on that northern pattern. I noticed that they'll switch up like that. But that's one advantage you have of hunting the water. When you have water in those bottoms, you hear that animal in the water. You know, so I found myself when I first went into an area where I figured there should be deer in an area, and I get set up, and I don't see anything. I don't get to kill anything or whatever. But I'll hear that animal. I find, like, in the basin, they like to use those groups of cypress trees. If you look at the horizon, you know, in that swamp, you pick out those groups of cypress trees, you know, like those cypress areas, you know what I mean? And that animal's going to do the same thing on his traveling habits, you know. He's going to travel that swamp based upon what the tops of those cypress trees look like, you know what I mean? And I've heard him, you know, and you could tell, like, as I hear him coming in that water, that I'll spot that group of cypress trees. Then he's in that group of cypress trees, and he's in that group of cypress trees, and you find so he's following that break of cypress. You know what I mean? So I'll reset up over there, make sure I try to set up downwind from him, and sure enough, when I get in that group of cypress trees that I spot and associate with the noise I hear of him traveling in that water, I end up getting in a good ambush point to kill him. And another thing they like to travel, there's numerous sloughs like in the Atchafalaya Basin. And the sloughs travel from the pilot channel to the briar thickets and the higher ground. And a lot of them travel all the way, you know, to they meander through the woods and they go all the way to the bottom. And there's a lot of briar thickets a lot of times along those sloughs, you know. And they like to travel those sloughs because it's a straight shot, not maybe a meandering shot, but it's a travel corridor for them that they know how to get from that river to get to that bottom where they want to get into to get away from the pressure. And I found, like, backing off away from those briar thickets along those sloughs in between that bottom and that river, I catch them going in or coming out, you know, whether I'm hunting afternoon or hunting morning. And I learn, you know, and you'll see. You'll see where they're clipping on stuff. You'll see they're leaving a little rub here and there, you know what I mean? And then when they start rutting, you're going to start finding those scrapes. And it's not always good to a lot of times you can hunt a hot scrape. A hot scrape has produced good deer for us. I found like it was a double hot scrape one time, and I wanted my boy to kill the deer, and I set him up. He climbed up that cypress tree and nice 8-point just a few years ago. Came out to check those scrapes, and he got him. And then a couple of days later, I made a morning hunt, and it was an older deer. You could tell he was kind of on his way down. And I caught him coming in the morning, and he was coming to check those hot scrapes. You know what I mean? But it's not all. I don't think it's always good to hunt right at those scrapes. You figure where he's coming from to come there, and you try to cut him off in between. You know what I mean?
And by doing that, are you trying to find like rubs going away from there or big tracks going away from there?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Now, one thing I want to ask, kind of on the scrapes, because I've heard of other guys hunting some of these swamps that struggle finding scrapes. what do you have to find in order to locate scrape? Like, is it just on whatever little high grounds around there, or is there any kind of do you see any somewhat of a pattern of where you'll find a scrape in the swamps?
Yeah, like last year when I killed that good 9-point that I killed, I found some fresh scrapes on the ridge that I'm telling you that I was hunting. So that was a telltale sign that I had some good deer in the area. And I ended up killing a 7-point just a week or two later than I killed that 9. And he wasn't a great buck, but he was my last buck tag. I had enough. I was ready to finish. I was bleating and grunting, and I bleated him up. And I said, that's a pretty hunt. I'm gonna take him, and I shot him, and I got him. But I found those scrapes in that cypress bottom, but it was dry. It was a ridge. But we had caught some big rain, and you had water in the deeper part of the bottom that I had paddled to access that area. And then the water started taking those scrapes. So, don't get discouraged if you're hunting places like that and you find some scrapes and like the water took them. You know what I mean? You're going to think, well, it's old. The animal's not on it anymore. No, not necessarily. He's back there in that swamp and he's leaving that sign behind, but it doesn't mean he left the area. It's just we had a big rain or the water started coming up to where it's taking his scrapes that he's making scrapes right there because he's trying to attract does or he's trying to get on some does, with those scrapes. So I killed a 9-point and a 7-point in that area, and the water had actually started taking some of the scrapes that I had found to let me know that those good deer were in that area.
Okay. All right, we got a switch out going on here. Gavin, what's up?
What's up, man?
Nothing much.
I just got a quick question.
Yeah.
And I think this is going to help some hunters. So he keeps mentioning the bottoms and the sign that he's seeing. A lot of, like, even me, when I first started, I would get caught up in sign on that high ground. And a lot of what hunters do is they get caught up on that sign because that's typically where the night sign is going to be.
Right.
So for the guys who's hunting the swamps, I would say, like you mentioned the hot scrape. Mm-hmm. The only thing that really makes that a great scrape is the location, right?
Exactly.
So whenever you consider hunting the swamp and you consider those bedding areas, you would say, okay, well, these bucks are living in and around water. So finding the rubs, the tracks, the scrapes,
right, in
and around water and thick cover is what you're looking for. Versus a lot of, like, I spent years like walking high ground and wondering why I could never get on any deer.
What was bad, to kind of answer to your question, Gavin, what's bad about trying to hunt those good looking scrapes or sign on the higher ground, most of that is happening at night. So if you're not hunting it at night, you're not going to have that encounter with the animal. So what you got to figure is, well, where this animal's bedding at. You know what I'm saying? If there's a bottom there, or if there's some heavy briar thicket. I've killed them coming out of briar thickets a lot too. They'll lay up in the middle of them briars, and you climb high enough, and all of a sudden, at that right time, that animal will start working his way out of those briars. But a lot of times they in that swamp bottom, and you got to figure out how he's traveling from where I think he is to come here and make these scrapes that you're seeing on the high ground that you're hunting all the time and you never having any encounters. You know what I mean? He's coming there, but he's coming there in the dark at night. So you gotta kind of understand. Well, let me try to get closer to his bed without bumping him, because you don't want to bump him. You throw your scent in a dominant buck's nose in the Atchafalaya Basin too many times, you're gonna mess up on him and you're never gonna kill him. You know what I'm saying? He's gonna go strictly nocturnal, and you're just gonna continue to educate him, and you're never gonna get him. So you got to try to figure out where he's at and get in between there. That travel corridor from where he wants to bed up where he feels safe to where he wants to go to find the does, find the feed, or whatever, Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to pitch this back at you, Gavin, actually. I'm glad that y'all switched out and you jumped on here real quick because you hunted this morning and you jumped a buck, what you believe is a buck, out of his bed, and then you showed us some trail camera pictures of some actual bedded bucks. And that's one thing that I really wanted to get into was the bedding area aspect because, again, out here, I don't even know where to begin with that. So, like, kind of explain, one, where is that buck bedding? And then I'm curious on like you guys kind of talking about that a little bit.
This is a good subject because what makes that, the reason I was able to find that buck in that specific bed is because it's for a specific reason. In other words, the time of year. And that's something that I've been learning hunting in the early season. Like, usually I'm trying to hunt around water, like what he's describing. But he mentioned earlier, like early in the year, when these deer haven't been very pressured, like this spot specifically, there's some bur oaks there, and those will drop they'll be done with by the end of the first week of the season. That's what led me to the area. But I did realize that I could potentially hunt specific beds for a specific reason. Like there's a feed tree that's only gonna be dropping for a short portion of the season, and they're not very pressured yet, right?
Okay.
But something else that you have to consider is that like squirrel season opened today, so I was covered in squirrel hunters, and that's something that we fight with often on the opening day of bow season. Sometimes it falls within the squirrel season, but yeah, I mean that like where I hunted this morning, that's been a few years of me trying to figure out that specific spot. So it was like last season I was probably 200 or 300 yards, maybe even further away from that spot, and I saw rubs. I actually posted a video on Facebook about it, and then later on in the season, mid-December, pre-rut time frame, I went walk this area again, and I ended up bumping bucks out of the cover that I bumped them out of today. So at that point is when I realized when I hunted it early season, I was way too far from the actual bedding cover, right? But when I saw those rubs, I got excited. But like that's what led me to, okay, I bumped these bucks here. Now at the beginning of next season, I can relate that sign I saw way away from there to where I hunted this morning, making an assumption based off of bumping bucks out of that cover and just the time of year and the early season sign that I saw the previous year. So that was just layering, but it's not often that I'm finding bucks on high ground, kind of like what he said.
No.
It has to be like a specific cover type.
In unpressured times, in unpressured times. Like I scouted an area one time, and I bumped a buck out of a briar thicket, which wasn't far from the riverbank, but the season hadn't really got started yet. But I had gone scout the area earlier just to try to start figuring out what those animals were doing, because I knew it was a good spot to have some good deer. And where I jumped this deer out of later in the season, there's a bottom, right? There's like an old lake bed in that area. And I found he started traveling and making rubs and scrapes and everything more out into that bottom and on the edge of that water, So he's probably on a hill somewhere in that water, and then he'll come out at night to those places kind of like where I jumped him at. But when the pressure wasn't there, you could have caught him on the high ground. You know what I mean? Like if I would have been hunting him on the bow season, I had a potential of catching him in the briar thicket on the higher ground. But as the squirrel hunters hit the woods and the hunters start hitting the woods, four-wheelers start moving around, boat traffic starts happening, those animals start paying attention to that, and they want to be more secluded and more away from where the potential pressure is or where it's going to come from. So you got to think about that. So where this animal's going to go to try to get away from these people who are trying to kill him, And that's how I always have that mentality in my mind, where this animal's hanging around to get away from the pressure. And that's how I find that sign to where you find him in those bottoms, and you hear him a couple of times in the water, you'll find his big turds, you know what I mean? Like I had talked about earlier, you'll find his big tracks, and then you're able to nail down setting yourself up in a spot where he's going to be traveling to go to or from where he's going to or from.